Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PegEx podcast. Today we're talking about the essential training requirements for hazardous waste haulers. My name is Michael Bryant. By way of review, the EPA is an independent agency of the federal government. It was proposed and established 50 years ago by the executive order of Richard Nixon. Its mission was and remains to consolidate a variety of federal research, monitoring, standard setting, and enforcement activities into one agency, keeping us all earth-friendly by dint of law and threat of fine. That same year, the Occupational Safety and Health Act that gives us OSHA was enacted by Congress and signed into law by that very same president. As you undoubtedly know, OSHA is a veritable hydra of workplace health and safety standards for both private and public sector employees. In other words, don't mess with them. And then there's the federal DOT. It was established by an act of Congress in 1966 as a federal cabinet department concerned with all facets of transportation: cars, trains, trucks, planes, boats, anything with wheels or wings or a keel, and especially if it's hauling hazmat, the topic at hand. So who's actually in charge? Okay, this gets complicated. The aforementioned Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA, states that OSHA doesn't own jurisdiction over workplace health and safety if another federal agency exercises statutory authority in this area. U.S. courts interpret this peculiarity of the OSHA Act using a so-called gap theory, or hazard by hazard approach. For example, if the DOT has a regulation that would reduce or eliminate a workplace hazard, its regulations are applicable. If it doesn't, then OSHA regulations apply. Now think about that. The authority that decides which agency is alpha are the courts, which would suggest that such interpretations are forthcoming after you've done something one or the other agency doesn't like, haplessly instigating a litigious dogfight between the two that's all about you. As we're fond of counseling our readers and listeners, get expert advice. But let's move on. So how do the EPA and DOT commingle? In difference to the fact that hazardous waste transporters use public roads, highways, rails, and waterways, regulations for container specifications, labeling, marking, and placarding are primarily developed by the DOT with EPA input. Concerns primary to the EPA that your staff need to know about include EPA identification numbers. The EPA requires all hazmat haulers to have an EPA ID number, which is assigned to a transportation company as a whole rather than requiring each of its trucks to have its own unique ID. Then there's hazardous waste manifests. The EPA requires that a manifest accompany the movement of a hazardous waste cradle to grave. This manifest indelibly attaches a waste to your enterprise as it migrates from its point of origin to its ultimate destination facility, be it storage, treatment, recycling, or whatever. Then there's accidental discharges. Hazmat transportation drivers must be properly trained to take immediate action in the event of an accidental hazmat discharge, including but not limited to notifying local authorities and diking the discharge area to protect health and minimize any environmental impact. Ever hear of the FMSCA? In order to become certified as a hazmat hauler, besides OSHA, the EPA, and DOT, you need to pay attention to something called the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMSCA. A visit to the FMSCA website tells us, quote, "No person may offer or accept a hazardous material for transportation in commerce unless that person is registered in conformance with Subpart G of Part 107 of Chapter 49 CFR 171.2, parentheses A, and the hazardous material is properly classed, described, packaged, marked, labeled, and in condition for shipment as required or authorized." It might be worth a trip to their website to read all that again. It can get complicated. Then there are some primary concerns to the DOT that you need to know about as well. The CDL Class A license. As a first requirement, a hazmat hauler must have an active commercial driver's license, CDL Class A, and a safe driving record. If you or your employee doesn't have this license already, understand that regulations for this acquisition aren't consistent from state to state. Most states, however, require a learning permit period during which a CDL applicant drives with an experienced CDL holder in the vehicle. In due course, the applicant must pass a driving skills test, usually administered by the state DOT. Then there's Hazmat-specific training. If a person has an active CDL Class A, safe driving record, and is 21 years of age or older, he or she is duly qualified to make application for Hazmat certification. Additional requirements include proof of citizenship or legal residence, medical and optometric exams. There is also a TSA background check. The Federal Transportation Safety Administration, TSA, must conduct a background check as part of the Hazmat hauler application process, which takes up to about 60 days to complete. Then there's also the Hazmat knowledge test. The DOT requires that Hazmat drivers be tested for appropriate training in such areas as transit operations between destination points, proper handling of hazardous materials during loading and unloading, the safest way to readjust and resecure loads while in transit, and more. Given that regulations for hazardous waste transport ooze from 3 to 5 different agencies, depending on how you count them up, we asked our experts to come up with a comprehensive list of training requirements. But they advise that given the expansive and dynamic nature of federal regulations, it's impossible to do so definitively at any point in time. What was here today might be gone tomorrow, replaced by something else while you weren't looking. Added to that, remember that required training is both initial and recurrent. In government parlance, this means it must be updated periodically, usually annually. Did we mention that you should get expert advice? This would be a good time to do so. It gets complicated. With those caveats in mind, our experts provided what is necessarily a partial list of training that your hazmat hauling employees must receive, as there might be more depending on the individual job duties. So some items to note are security awareness training about the security risks associated with hazmat transportation and specific methods designed to diminish them. Then there's function-specific training relative to the particular knowledge and skills required for an individual to perform assigned hazmat transport responsibilities properly and safely. Then we have safety training for drivers, warehouse workers, and any other employee who handle a hazardous waste in advance, during, and/or subsequent to its transportation. There's also specialized driver training pertaining to vehicle inspection and operation, vehicle handling in diverse conditions, and special rules pertaining to tunnels, bridges, and railroads. Another trip to the FMSCA website would be handy to understand all of those conditions. Advanced security training is for companies required to have a security plan relative to their hazardous waste management. And then there's my favorite, HAZWOPER certification. HAZWOPER. I love that word. It stands for Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response, and it's for employees who must drive into hazardous waste sites, enter EPA-regulated TSDFs, or respond to hazardous waste emergencies. PegEx offers comprehensive hazmat transportation initial and recurrent training programs developed by regulatory experts who have unsurpassed industry expertise, as well as being experienced instructors. Using the latest techniques and technology, they can teach your employees what they need to know, both those directly involved in hazmat transport, such as drivers, or tangentially, such as hazmat handlers, before and after delivery. Check us out online at PegEx.com and find out more about the tools we have that can help you stay in compliance, reduce risk, and help you grow and build your business. Thanks for listening.